Everybody, this is Conrad Aggermont, CEO here at Agile IT. Thanks again for joining us for another Agile IT Tech Talk. Today's topic is going to be around compliance in Microsoft Teams. One of the things that we've done within Tech Talk is really, make the most of our partnership with Microsoft, not just for the things that we do with their products, but also their participation in talking with our customers, you all, a little bit about some of the exciting stuff that's happening around security, productivity, all those sorts of things. So really happy today to have David Branscome, who's a Microsoft architect, who's really going to not just talk about some of the general Microsoft compliance capabilities, but really focus on the Teams side. So at Agile IT, I've talked to you guys quite extensively of all the things we've been, or the work that we've been doing with Teams and excitement that we have there. But there's a lot of questions from customers of like, well, great, I'd love for my users to use this new productivity and either move to there from Slack or something else, or man, we've been doing everything on email and file systems. So, this place where we have all this great information that we can share and do it in one place and be productive is awesome. But I'm either in a regulated industry, or maybe I'm not in a regulated industry, but I still have other compliance requirements that I have to line up to because of state policies, or I'm doing things with customers because of GDPR. So I have all of these concerns. So really in this talk, I'm excited for you guys to kind of hear and see some of these other pieces really focused around Teams that can solve a lot of these problems. So David, I can see your screen, so excited to go through it. And if anybody has questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat window there or in the questions area, and we'll try and make sure to get that at the very least at the end, or we'll open the phone lines towards the end and answer them there. So thanks, David, and take it away.
All right, thanks very much. So as Conrad mentioned, there is a lot of talk around compliance and regulatory compliance specifically with many of the collaboration tools, and obviously collaboration tools by their very nature require the sharing of data with other people. But as we've seen recently, how social networking tools actually handle an individual's data varies from vendor to vendor. And one of the things that I've heard from many of the customers is, I'm not sure whether the tools that I'm using are compliant with the laws that I have to stay subject to, FINRA or FedRAMP or HIPAA or whatever it might be. Are these tools going to handle the data in the most private, secure manner? But an organization has to have the ability to control where their corporate data goes, how it's used, who's allowed to access it. So the question is, how does Microsoft handle security and privacy for Office 365 data? So I'm not going to go through every single one of these bullet points here, but we do take the security and privacy of your data very seriously. These are some of the tools and capabilities that we bring to bear to ensure that customer data is protected and provided the best support for different controls. So one of the things that's mentioned under the privacy column is support for GDPR controls. That, of course, by definition means that we have support for many other controls, as I mentioned, HIPAA or FINRA or whatever it might be. We provide many of the controls that the customer or partner can then implement to bring the organization into compliance. We've made a significant number of advancements in terms of becoming compliant with specific standards. So there are something like 950 different Office 365 controls around things like auditing, access control, incident response, risk assessment, all these different things that go into an overall regulatory compliance status. So meeting the ISO controls, the EU model clause, GDPR, HIPAA, FedRAMP, all these different things have a number of different controls that Microsoft manages on the back end with our data centers, with the way that we handle our networking, the way that we handle the hardware, the disposal of disks and so forth. So all these things are enabled by default. There are controls then that the customer layers on top of the Microsoft instituted controls to apply different controls that they feel brings them in compliance with regulations. And we could talk forever about those type of things, but one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that when you talk about compliance and compliance with Teams or any of the Office 365 workloads, there's a lot of pieces that could potentially come into play. Things like being able to do legal hold. How do you do auditing? How do you manage information protection? How do you do compliance searches? How do you handle data loss prevention? So all these things have some bearing when it comes to how you're going to implement these things with regard to Teams. So because there's so many pieces, it might seem like the way to implement these things would be extremely complicated, but it's actually not. And here's why. This is one of my favorite diagrams in the Teams documentation, and the reason is because it shows how Teams leverages the rest of Office 365 to become compliant. So if you're looking at Teams over here on the left-hand side, you realize that there's a chat service, there's the Office 365 substrate, which has some Azure services and so forth. But by and large, the way things work is that any kind of files are really back-ended by SharePoint or OneDrive. So anything, any kind of file stuff that is surfaced in Teams is actually exposed in SharePoint or OneDrive. Any kind of instant messaging or group chat or messages in a Teams channel or email that's sent to an Office 365 group, all that is handled by Exchange. So really, there are only two major components to the application of compliance controls. As long as the compliance controls are applied at those two locations, then Teams itself is compliant because it leverages those two channels for the information protection. And so you see over here on the right-hand side, the Office 365 information protection tools, the e-discovery, legal hold, compliance, your content search, archive, retention, audit logs, they are applied against email and against SharePoint, and by extension, then they're applied against Teams. So it really helps to kind of understand how that actually works when we talk about these compliance controls. And when I show you the demo, you'll see what I mean by that. This is the second part of it because there are capabilities for doing the same type of controls in an Exchange hybrid environment. There are some differences and some limitations when you do that, but the capability exists, and you might have to add some controls to your on-prem environment in order to make it fully compliant. And then the third piece of this is calling. So how do you bring your messages for calls into compliance? So your calling data, your meetings, conferencing, and so forth, how are they protected? And again, we're looking primarily at your Exchange mailbox or the Office 365 group mailbox as handling that information. So by and large, what we're saying is that Exchange and SharePoint are the channels through which your security and compliance tools are working. As just a very brief overview of the licensing and requirements from a licensing perspective for these security and compliance features. This is what this looks like. I'll let you take a look at it in the deck when you download it later on. But obviously the greatest number of controls are going to be available for you in the Enterprise E5 suite with smaller subsets of controls in some of the other SKUs. Okay, so let's take a quick look at how some of these compliance controls actually work. So the first thing I'm going to show you is not necessarily a live demo because the feature hasn't been enabled in my tenant yet, but it is a feature that is definitely being rolled out in the very near future, and it has to do with data loss prevention. So the scenario that we're looking at here is a guest user, and this is not an unusual thing within Teams that you would have a guest user joining your team and doing some work with you. So in this case, Mary or Marie, however you want to pronounce her name, is asking, and we're assuming that this is perhaps a medical environment. She's asking about some patients, and she needs some information from them. I'm trying to remember the name of the recipient here, but in any case, this person, whatever her name is going to type in some information about a credit card number, the expiration date, the confirmation code, Social Security into the chat. Obviously, that's not going to comply with certain regulations and data loss prevention policies that you've set up on the back end. And I'll show you where those get set up in just a moment. So yeah, she sends the message. From her perspective, it looks like it's been sent, but she does get this bang up here in the top left-hand corner that shows that she's got a message to take a look at. When she goes to look at it, it indicates that there is an issue. The message was blocked. It gives her the option of selecting this, what can I do about it? When she selects what can I do, now this is an administrator defined control, right? So we can block it and just that's it, or you can give the user some options. In this case, she's got the option to override the block and send it. She can report to her admin, whatever she wants to do. In this case, she's going to override and send it and confirm that that's what she actually wants to do, and the message gets sent. Now, on the recipient side, she also sees that the message was blocked because it contains sensitive content. But then once the original sender, Marie, confirms that the data was allowed to be sent, then the information shows up. So that's just one example of how data loss prevention can be implemented within the Teams interface. What I'm going to do now is switch to my other screen and give you an actual example on a live tenant. So what I'm showing here is two different experiences. It's the same tenant, but two different personas. On the one hand, I've got Megan, who is the global administrator on the tenant, and then on the other hand, I've got Patty, who is the compliance administrator on the tenant. So if we take a look at just generally what function and features are available for Megan, she has the admin console, and if we go in here to the admin center, she's got access to all these different tool sets. What I do is I go into the Security and Compliance Center. Once I'm in the Security and Compliance Center, I can go into the Data Loss Prevention tab. I've got some policies set up here for US financial data. So if things like credit cards show up, or other banking routing numbers and so forth, HIPAA, and then personally identifiable information. So I've got these set up to trigger whenever any of that data crosses any of the Office 365 services. We see here that we've had kind of an uptick in DLP policy matches. So we'll take a look at that in just a minute. What I've also got is the ability to do a content search. So if I go down here and click on content search, let's say that I want to find out where the name Ashley Borden was used in a Teams channel. So again, remember, I'm a global administrator here. Megan is a global administrator in Office 365. But let's notice what happens. So there was some information. The search was completed. There's an item that shows up. One mailbox was triggered. If I go to click View Results, however, notice what happens. To preview search results, I have to ask my compliance admin to grant me preview permissions. Now, this is in spite of the fact that I am a global admin. So we do separate these roles very strictly, because it isn't necessarily the case that a global admin would have the legal standing to search for or see the results for a compliance search. What I can do, however, is with Patty, she does have the compliance admin features. Notice, however, she does not have the admin tab as an app in her Office 365 portal. But what she can do is go to protection.office.com, and she gets access to the things that she's been granted permissions to. So what I'm going to do here is click on Content Search. And in just a moment here, the same searches show up as they did under Megan's account. If I click on Ashley Borden and go in to view the results, now what I see here is it shows me which team the content showed up in. It showed up as an instant message, and there's my the content that was triggered, Ashley Borden, and we see that there's a social security number, looks like a credit card number, so we can do the searches that way. One thing to take note of here is that the locations where you search are also customizable, and here's where we get the Teams capability. So here we have the ability to search within Teams messages, within Teams sites, as well as all the other Office 365 properties. I can search for individual teams or groups. So in this case, I looked within the X1050 launch team, just within that specific team location, but I could search for all of them for specific types of content or keywords or whatever it may be. So things like this allow us to be very granular in the way that we perform searches. We also have the ability, I believe I have to go back to Megan's account, to apply policies. So the policy, if I take a look here, notice here that the policy, the data loss prevention policy, is only looking at Exchange, Mail, SharePoint, and OneDrive. You remember the slide that I showed you a little bit earlier about where the channels are for Teams communications? It was these three things, right? So the data loss prevention policy was only looking at these channels, and yet it did find information that was sent to Teams. So that kind of illustrates the point that the functionality of data loss prevention and compliance within Teams runs through Exchange and SharePoint, if that makes sense. So that's just a very brief overview of some of the capabilities within Teams and some of the compliance tools that you can use. There are many, many more. And I'm sure the folks at Agile IT would be happy to show those to you. As a closeout, let me just share very quickly in the deck that I'm going to be providing. There are a number of resources that you can use for getting information about compliance, archiving, auditing, retention, privacy, conditional access, and threat protection. So I will hand it back over to Conrad, and thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. I think that, one of the things that you and I talked about was, that all these pieces that allows you to do all this compliance really comes from all these other fundamental areas that's baked in. So that really kind of makes it shine through Microsoft Teams so well. And it's nice because those same security things you use in other places in Office 365. So this is where that story starts to get, I think, stronger, where it's not like, oh, here's a new product, let's learn how to do MFA and compliance for that. Oh, here's another email, let's learn how to do that. And then they don't mix. So the fact that they're all starting to come together, it's really, really good.
That's a really important point too. Is that when an organization buys multiple products, if you've got Slack for one thing and Zoom for another thing, and a different email system, you've got to figure out how to implement those privacy controls or compliance controls on each one of those different things, and then how do you perform an e-discovery against all those vendors? It becomes very challenging. Whereas when you bring it all together within Teams and just have that one world view of your collaboration space, it becomes much more manageable.
Absolutely. Great. So let's go ahead and take a look at the questions here. Let's go ahead and also open up the phone lines.